Happy Mother's Day. I have often said that I'm a Jersey boy and an affected Southerner. And if you listen to my inflections over time, you might find a hint of Georgia drawl or Hoboken wise guy, depending on my mood. It happens. But today is Mother's Day, and thank God for mamas. Unfortunately, in a pandemic crisis visited upon by a novel coronavirus, many mothers who were here just last year or even last week are no longer with us today. And tragically, many more by function of statistics will not be here next year. The reasonably foreseeable outcome of a contagion that falls prey upon chiefly the elderly, and which, as we have known for a fact, as early as the beginning of March, finds those elderly mothers residing for extended periods in living arrangements in which they are confined, such as nursing homes, a target of opportunity for community infections and outbreak clusters. And to date, more mothers residing in nursing homes have gone on to meet their Creator than have been infected at any place of worship during a Sunday service or any other essential or non-essential social gathering. And consequent to current litigation, ironically, Mother's Day, in my best Joycey voice, is probably the best title for this reflection video in persevering fellowship through pandemic crisis. Because we are truly stuck in the mud and trying our best to dig out of a pretty messy situation. A situation in which Bugs Bunny might find himself declaring that his name was Mud. Back at the turn of the last century, the beginning of what was called the American century, even before a war to end all wars, visited by pandemic crisis and the beginning of chemical warfare as doughboys faced the debilitating effects of mustard gas, battling through the trenches, a Republican Roosevelt, to use the descriptive term of the historian John Morton Bloom, was making a name for himself by providing needed leadership in what was at the time the greatest engineering feat that man had ever attempted. Construction of a canal across the Isthmus of Panama to connect the oceans of the Atlantic and the Pacific and facilitate transnavigation of the world. The idea actually dated back to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain in 1534. But it was not until John Stevens and the Oceanic Canal Commission came along from 1903 to 1907 under Roosevelt's leadership to construct 3 locks along 51 miles of a path through the Cut of Calabar, that to connect a 51-mile canal to make a 40-mile trip between 2 oceans, that progress and accomplishment was finally made on a project that would not even open until 1914 under another president, a Jersey boy, well, at least governor, but son of Virginia, named Woodrow Wilson, in 1914. And that, in its wake, had tarnished the reputations of luminaries like Gustav Eiffel of the Eiffel Tower and George Washington Goethals of the Goethals Bridge. The biggest problem was the Calabar Cut, an 8.5-mile man-made valley that had to be constructed between the locations for 2 key locks along the canal. Serious thoughts about the canal project arose first around 1880, and efforts were made and mistakes were made 12 years before any scientists even knew that viruses existed. And if you have ever been to Panama, down to the Jungle Operations Training Center, or just traveling on a boat, particularly through the canal zone, you may not be aware that it runs through one of the world's largest triple canopy rainforests, which you may know by watching some nature shows, provides an ample opportunity for life forms that have yet to be discovered. Maybe the cure for cancer is in there, they say. And which by definition means that the region experiences quite a lot of rain. And when you have a mixture of rain and fertile topsoil, you can reasonably expect to find a lot of red mud. And what engineers quickly discovered as scientists and found quite problematic was that when you removed mud from a construction site in a man-made valley, it tends to be replaced by more mud flowing down from higher ground by function of Newtonian laws of gravity. It's like a science. Now, the indigenous population was uneducated and superstitious. And when they saw this frustration, they defined it in the terms that they knew. The gods had to be angry with the disturbance of nature. Sounds familiar. And were stopping the progress of the engineers. An idea that sounded simply ludicrous to scientists, even in that day and age. But when the uneducated workers, began to fall sick, oddly, their wealth of experiential knowledge agreed with the scientists that some force was reacting to their activity. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, natural or supernatural, and everyone agreed that it was producing bad air or malaria. And for years, there they stood, stuck in the mud, unable to progress forward because more mud kept falling into the cut they dug, and they couldn't figure that out, and sick and dying from bad air that was stirred by their activity, and trying to fashion a solution based upon what they knew had to be true. Now, at some point, if what you are doing is not working, maybe something is wrong with the way that you're thinking. But that never dawned on him. Science had determined hundreds of years before that yellow fever was caused by bad air. Even if the scientists failed to notice that their workers were not all dying, as they would if afflicted by yellow fever, but simply becoming debilitatingly sick. And so in the middle of the jungle, it was quite a comically tragic sight of indigenous natives wearing face masks to protect themselves from the wrath of the gods, being supervised by scientists and engineers wearing face masks to protect themselves from bad air, wholly unaware that teams of mosquitoes were launching coordinated attacks, lethal attacks with malaria and yellow fever simultaneously, totally uninhibited by their defensive strategy. But this Mother's Day story has a happy ending, as we all know. An Army officer named Major Ronald Ross and his commander, Colonel W.C. Gorgas, had experienced a similar problem years before in their occupation efforts in Havana. But rather than take orders from above, they decided to employ a scientific method to determine that mosquitoes were transmitting a disease, totally unaware at the time that an invisible enemy, which we now call a virus, was the ultimate cause. But they were able to use what they saw to fashion a solution. And they were so excited about their discovery and the methods they had developed to flatten the curve, clearing out breeding grounds for mosquitoes, erecting mosquito nets that would stop mosquitoes, and treating patients with quinine, that they decided to share their discovery with the folks stuck in the mud in Panama, who should have been welcome, grateful, who decided that despite evidence of success, they had to be crazy. Those guys in Panama had different circumstances than whatever they were experiencing in Havana. And so they just had to be crazy or were denying science because they defied what science said to them, listening rather to what they had concluded through observation, which we like to at least call a scientific method. But the big Mother's Day lesson is not that they eventually got themselves out of the mud, or that science and engineering finally prevailed at a time when they really could have used a good mother But more, what was the motivation of Major Ross and Colonel Gorgas to press on against the majority opinion? If, like most kids on Mother's Day, you were to ask why they love and appreciate their mother, more likely than not, the answer will be because of something that their mother had done for them. Helped me with this or that, cheered me on, was always there for me, whatever reason. It's always transactional in tender of consideration of gratitude for something that was done for them. But the only thing that Major Ross and Colonel Gorgas were getting for their efforts was untold grief, mockery, and shame. Probably like what a mother often gets for the things she tries to do for her kids. Maybe it arises out of duty rather than something that you get in return. And so the big question of this day of remembrance of mothers still here and mothers gone away is not why we love them, but why in this crazy world they actually love us. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress with liberty, honor, and excellence. By God, we shall make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.